You're a soldier standing in a field 2,000 years ago. You can't see the enemy yet, just hills and dust and wind. Then it starts. Not screaming, not war cries, footsteps, thousands of them, hitting the ground at the exact same time, like a heartbeat that won't stop getting closer. You'd think an army of screaming men would be the scariest thing you could face, but you're wrong. Silence was scarier, because the men marching toward you right now aren't afraid, and men who aren't afraid don't need to shout to prove it. This is the story of why Roman soldiers were some of the most terrifying fighters history has ever seen. And it's not because of what you think. It wasn't the sword. It wasn't the armor. It wasn't even the size of the empire behind them. It was something much stranger and much closer to home than you'd expect. Let's start with what most people get wrong. Most ancient armies fought as individuals, brave men, strong men, each one fighting for his own glory, his own name, his own story. Rome didn't build an army of heroes. Rome built an army of parts. Every soldier was trained to be replaceable. If the man next to you fell, another man filled his spot within seconds. No gap, no panic, no hesitation. Picture a machine with thousands of moving pieces. Now imagine that machine can bleed, and it still doesn't stop. That's what an enemy was actually facing. This is called a formation. Soldiers moving and fighting as one connected shape, instead of as separate men swinging swords. The most famous one was called the Testudo, Latin for tortoise. Here's how it worked. Soldiers locked their shields together, above their heads, around their sides, until the whole unit looked like one giant shell. Arrows bounced off it. Spears bounced off it. Rocks thrown from castle walls bounced off it. An enemy could throw everything they had at a testudo. And it just kept walking forward. Slow, steady, unbothered. Now think about what that does to your mind if you're the one defending. You're throwing every weapon you have, and the thing in front of you doesn't even flinch. How do you fight something that refuses to be afraid? But here's where it gets even stranger. The individual soldier wasn't even the scariest part of the Roman army. The system around him was. Roman soldiers marched up to 20 miles a day, and they weren't traveling light. Each man carried his own armor, his own weapons, his own food for weeks, tools to dig a trench, and build an entire fortified camp every single night, even if they were only staying one night. All of it on his back. Historians actually gave these men a nickname because of it. They called them Marius's mules. Because a Roman soldier carried almost as much gear as a pack animal. So by the time they reached the battlefield, they weren't fresh. They weren't rested. They were sore, exhausted, hungry, and still deadly. Sit with that for a second. You're not just facing a strong enemy. You're facing an enemy that fights just as hard when it's tired, just as hard when it hurts, just as hard when every part of its body is telling it to stop. That's not just physical strength. That's discipline that goes deeper than the body. Discipline that doesn't ask permission from how you feel. And that discipline wasn't an accident. It was built, deliberately, sometimes brutally. If a Roman unit broke formation and ran from battle, the punishment wasn't a warning. It wasn't extra training the next day. Sometimes officers would select 1 out of every 10 men in that unit, and the other 9 were ordered to execute him. Right there, in front of everyone. It was called decimation, from the Latin word for 10. Brutal? Yes, but it worked exactly the way it was designed to work. Because now running away wasn't the safe option anymore. Standing your ground, even facing death in front of you, became safer than turning your back and facing your own army behind you. Think about what that does to a soldier's mind before a single sword is even drawn. The enemy isn't the only thing he's afraid of anymore. Fear has been built into the system behind him too, on purpose. There was nowhere left for panic to live. And this is why, when history talks about Rome's success, it rarely gives credit to one brilliant general or one legendary weapon. It gives credit to the system, a system that trained fear out of individual decisions and replaced it with something the Romans valued more: consistency. Soldiers who showed up exhausted and fought anyway. Soldiers who were afraid and marched anyway. Soldiers who didn't need to feel brave, because the structure around them made bravery the only available option. So here's the real answer to why Roman soldiers were terrifying. It was never really about strength. It was about the absence of chaos. No panic, no hesitation, no single man's fear ever being allowed to spread and take down the men around him. They moved like one organism that refused to break, even when every piece of it wanted to. And here's the part that should actually get under your skin. You already know this feeling, just without the armor. Every time you show up to something you're dreading, a hard conversation, a deadline you don't want to face, a gym session your body is begging you to skip. And you do it anyway. Not because you're fearless, but because somewhere along the way, you built a system for yourself where quitting felt worse than showing up. That's the exact same principle. Discipline was never really about not feeling fear. It was about building something strong enough that fear stops getting the final vote. And maybe that's the real reason we're still talking about these men, 2,000 years later. Not because they were never afraid, but because they built something stronger than fear itself. And once you've built that, silence stops sounding like weakness. It starts sounding like the loudest thing in the room.